but I remember that I was told you had a stroke. And then there was a period of time where I was alone. And I remember just like literally bawling. And that is by far the most alone I've ever felt in my life.
And I just looked at my phone and I tried to find you. And I remember that I could not find you because in favorites in the iPhone, you have the first favorite you add in there is in the top left. I remember just trying to find you and I couldn't, and I didn't understand why.
Okay. Hey guys, we are filming episode 3. We're going to be talking about Steven's stroke, and we're going to be going into the details there. A lot of it will be from Steven's perspective, but we'll ask each other some questions and apologize in advance for the lighting. We are filming in the evening. Episode 1 and 2 is probably kind of rough, but we are working on it. Hopefully every episode gets a little bit better. If not, bear with us. It's a learning curve. Same with the audio as well. So yeah, we just appreciate you guys sticking with it. If you missed episode 1 and 2, we introduced ourselves in episode 1, talked a little bit about the things that have happened to us, who we are, why we're doing this. Episode 2, we dove into our daughter's birth, where she was born clinically dead for 25 minutes. This is episode 3. We're going to talk about his stroke. And episode 4, we will dive into my spinal leak, which was about 30 days after that. And episode 5 is going to be Mila's seizure, which is going to be a really tough episode. So hang in there, buckle up, and we are just now kind of really ramping up and getting started. Okay, so a lot of memories that you probably know, but we'll just kind of talk through the moment that I got the call. So I remember I was sitting there with a face mask on and I was just doing my thing. You were playing basketball at the church, which is something that you did every Tuesday with some guys. And I remember sitting there and getting a call from our friend Zach. And he never calls me, has never called me before. So it was kind of this moment where my stomach sank and I knew something was wrong. Obviously, I had no idea what it was. But the fact that he was calling me meant that there was a problem. And he picked up the phone and said that you were acting strange. And he said that you just weren't acting yourself and that you were having some trouble. I can't remember if you said you were having trouble like maybe talking or remembering things or seeing things. But I know that he put me on the phone with you and I just knew something was wrong. And that was the point in which I decided to get to the church and try to figure out what was going on. And I don't remember if I told him to call 911 at that time or not. I think I did. But then I think I also was like, well, hold on, just let me see how fast I get there. I think I said, let me see how fast I get there. And if it takes me too long to get there, then then call 911. And I don't really know the reason for that. I was just probably panicking. But I ran out the door. Ariana was sitting on the couch by the front door and she was like, where are you going? And I said, something's wrong with Dad. I have to go. I'm sorry. I love you. Bye. And that was it. And I left. Anything in particular you want to add there before we move on?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that Zach, who was my best friend, that I've known him since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So it's important to know that he had a history with me throughout the years. Yeah. Knows how I was, what kind of person I was, how I acted very well. He is probably the best guy I know, so I've known him for a long time. Yeah. And thankfully he was there because I can't say that other people would have caught that. So I think that's very important to remember is thankfully he was there with me. Yeah. So,
and Aiden was there too. Yeah. Which wasn't the greatest thing, but Aiden was also able to help unlock your phone and stuff like that too. So that was good because, why did he unlock your phone? I don't remember.
Well, it's because I asked him to. I was sitting in the car without getting too far into that because I think we will later on, but I just could not seem to unlock it and find your name. Yeah. Okay. So that's the reason right there.
Okay. So when I ran out the door, got in the car, I remember I started driving and I missed my turn. So like just in my panic, like we went that way all the time, but I missed that right-hand turn right at the 4-way stop. And so at that point I called Zach and I said, it's going to take me too long. Call 911. No, let me back up. I talked to Kyle first because he was a trained EMT or paramedic. I don't know the difference exactly, but he told me to call 911 so that they could go ahead and have the hospital call code stroke, which spoiler, I can't say that word, alert never happened. And so anyway, so I missed my turn. I told Zach to call 911 and just went as fast as I could, the alternate route to get there. showed up and your sister, who was a nurse at one of the local hospitals there, had said, have him sent to, this particular hospital. It was like a satellite version, remember, of the main one. And so that was kind of already the plan, and she was, I think, putting some wheels in motion with friends that she had that were working that night. So I arrived at the church and I came in, but I'm going to stop here and I'm going to let you back up to what happened when you were playing basketball.
Yep. So I remember getting to the church, going through basketball like normal. Nothing has changed. I was probably in the best shape of my life, I would say, during that time since college. Mm-hmm. I was working out, I think, a minimum of 6 days a week, playing basketball every Tuesday.
I think it was like 5 days a week.
It was 6 there for a little bit until you asked me to take the weekends off, to do that. So I did. And so it was 5 at that point, but it was 6. And ended up, I was in great shape, running full court. At my age, that's pretty good, I would say. It's kept me in shape. I could definitely feel it afterwards. I was tired. But we ended up doing that. Aiden was there playing with his friend, brought him along as well. And I just remember going down the floor. It was after the first full game, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. But I remember somebody passed me the ball, and it ended up like going through my hands, which is not something that I normally do. I'm very coordinated. I'm not the greatest basketball player, but I was decent at it long enough to know what I'm doing. And I just ended up acting funky. They said I would, when I was dribbling sometimes or even guarding, I would sometimes just glance up at the ceiling, which was a little weird. I don't remember any of that. I really don't. But
you don't remember looking at the ceiling at all?
No, I don't. I truly do not.
Did you remember at the time? Because I feel like you...
Maybe.
I feel like you did, unless you were just regurgitating what you were told you were doing.
I have to rely on a lot of regurgitation from Zach and the others that were there because I truly
probably hard
don't.
To distinguish the memories.
Yeah, some of that I just truly can't remember, but I do remember acting funky. And I remember what happened next is I said that I need to sit down. I said I need to sit down for a second. And thankfully there was a guy there that was playing that I ended up, he was a firefighter as well. And so he was like, "You don't look right." He said, "There's something off about you." And he could tell too, because I had been there playing for weeks and weeks. Yeah. So he ended up getting a kit. He just wanted to test my blood.
Your blood sugar.
Yeah, blood sugar, and ended up doing that. And he said everything
pressure.
he said everything was normal, which was, weird. And so I was like, well, maybe I'm just tired, maybe I'm coming down with something, whatever else it is. And ended up that not being the case. I remember us getting done, and I remember telling Aiden that we had to go. And I remember walking out to the car, and I remember sitting in the passenger seat, and I remember just sitting there, and I left it on. I left the car running just to kind of get some air.
But Zach was in there at that time, right?
Zach was coming out, and me and him walked out, and I remember just sitting there, and he was there, and he asked me, I think I remember him asking me again, "You okay, buddy? Like, I feel like I need to call Rachel." And I was like, well, I said, "No, I don't. I think I'm okay. Like, I can call her." And I ended up picking up my phone trying to do it.
Oh, and okay. That's the order then.
Yeah, I think. And I just looked at my phone, and I opened it. I was able to unlock it. It wasn't with my face, I don't think. It was with...
It had to have been.
I think it was either... I don't know.
Based on what we'll tell later, it had to have been your face.
Maybe so. And I ended up unlocking it. However, that was the first time.
It had to have been your face. Yeah.
And I tried to find you, and I remember that I could not find you because in favorites in the iPhone, you have the first favorite you add in there is in the top left, or at least it was on mine. And I remember just trying to find you, and I couldn't, and I didn't understand why. Yeah. So I shut the phone off. I remember closing it, and I remember saying, I think is when I asked Aiden. I said, "Aiden, can you get to and find Mom in here?" Yeah. And I think he did that, and he was able to find you.
But you never called me from your phone, not till later. Zach called me first.
Yeah, Zach may have called you, sir. I don't remember that part because I think I was talking with Aiden at the time. Okay. So I just remember getting Aiden to unlock it.
He probably just decided to stop waiting on you to unlock your phone.
He may have
called me.
He may have, and I remember he did. He called you and said that Stephen's not acting right, and then I know y'all talked for a little bit, and then after that, shortly after, I think it was, the ambulance came by. I mean, there was a fire station right across the road.
Yeah.
So it wasn't long before they showed up. And I just remember that the firefighter came out as well and was like, hey, yeah, I took his blood pressure, blood sugar, all that stuff. Like, everything looks good. Like, we don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So I remember wanting to fight that even there. I did not want
the ambulance.
I did not want to go on it. I wanted to go home, and I was like, I just feel like I could sleep this off.
If I can interject, the reason, and it's important for them to know, the reason that I jumped to the ambulance was, yes, he was acting weird, but I didn't necessarily have a full list of symptoms yet. But you had a history of what we thought was a DVT at the time. Now, we did find out later it was an SVT. So a DVT is a deep vein thrombosis where you have a blood clot in a deeper vein. His was in his leg. We again thought it was a deep vein. We did find out later on it was in the greater saphenous, which is in fact a superficial vein. But with a history of a deep vein thrombosis in your 30s, that my mind did immediately go to stroke. And so that's why I said call 911. So the ambulance arrived and I showed up shortly after. So what do you remember during that period?
I don't remember anything. To be honest, I don't.
Okay.
Nope, not until I got in the ambulance itself. What about yourself? Do you remember any of that part?
Yeah, everything. So I remember I walked in and they had you on a 12 lead. They were running an EKG, ECG, whatever, EKG. And that would have been checking your heart. I remember the main firefighter with the station that was transporting you or would transport you telling me that it looked like AFib. And so at that point, I was sure it was a stroke because AFib is a huge risk factor for a stroke. And so he showed me the strip. I remember taking a photo of it and everything. And you were kind of like, they were asking you questions. They put you on the stretcher. They asked you like what year it was, who the president was. And you were being like, you were kind of cutting up with them a little bit. And to someone that didn't know you, they might think that that was your normal baseline. But to me and to Zach, the way that you were acting was like you were on something. And so we knew that you were not acting normal. And so I remember telling them, the fire first responders, whatever, I'm blanking on what they're called, but I remember telling them that, hey, I know you guys don't know him, but this is not his baseline. Like, this is not the way he normally acts. And then I remember asking Zach to like validate that because I just wanted to make sure, like, hey, you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, right? Like, he doesn't normally act like this. And Zach was like, yeah, no, this is not him. And so at that point they loaded you into the ambulance and I asked if I could come and they said yes. I left my car just like sitting there. And then Aiden went home with Zach because Zach's son is his friend. And so that was a blessing, I think, for Aiden because he was able to be distracted. So he went home with him. And who did we call for the girl? Oh, I called Sarah. Sarah and Kyle went to the girls because at this point it would have been like what, 10-ish, 9, 10 at night. And Ariana wasn't old enough, still isn't old enough to be overnight or be late at night. So we got into the ambulance. Do you remember anything at all in the ambulance?
I really don't. I don't remember anything up until we got to the actual hospital itself. I sure don't. How about yourself?
Yeah. It was my first experience riding in an ambulance in the back as a passenger, like not a patient. This time I was in I cannot remember what seat they call it. They call it something. Y'all tell me if you remember. But you're in a 4-point harness, 4-point harness. And so I was in that seat. And at that point I was making calls. So I knew they had you. They were doing whatever they needed to do with you. I know they were starting IVs and whatnot. And so I was calling your sister first. And she told me that they were waiting for you at the hospital and that she had a couple friends that were working. And then I think I called my family and let them know what was going on. And I'm not sure who all else, but pretty much just, I think, talking to people that needed to know until we got there. And it wasn't far. It was 10, 15 minutes and going, higher speed, probably 15 tops. And so we got to the hospital. They took you. I had to go through the front entrance. Do you remember being alone without me at any point?
Not really. I don't. Mm-mm.
So they took you, and I remember being kind of frustrated by that because I rode in on the ambulance. Whatever. This is not like they didn't have, to my knowledge, a trauma bay or anything like that. But they took you back, and so I had to go through the front and let them know like who I was or whatever. And then they made me sit and wait. And at this point, I was like kind of frustrated. I didn't say anything, but I was really kind of irritated. And I texted your sister and I said, hey, you might find out before me. Please let me know if you hear anything. So at that point, they called me back pretty quickly. And so I didn't end up having to get information from her at that time. Got to the room with you. I don't remember all of the exact details. I just remember that they decided to do a neuro consult. And I remember that you were angry and you wanted to go home. Do you remember that part?
Yeah, I do. I remember sitting in the bed and just saying, I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
I remember I did pitch a fit about being there. I did not want to be there at all. And then they rolled something in, like a virtual, I don't know who it was. It was a virtual something.
Bedside consult, yeah.
Yeah. And then they ended up going through a couple of different tests, I remember. And
you didn't really pitch a fit. You were like cold, which normally to people that you don't know, you're more extroverted and friendly, but you were not nice. You weren't rude, but you weren't nice either, which was not normal for you. Even when you're in a situation where you may not agree with being there or whatever, your normal baseline is still to be nice to them, but you were not. So they rolled in. So it was like a virtual neuro consult where neurology, I think he was a resident, would have been sitting at the main hospital and did a bedside consult from this device. First time we had seen it. And then he had asked me to go get Steven's nurse and have her come in so that she could do some of the actual physical testing, sensation tests and whatnot. Do you remember the images, the cards and stuff that he held up and asked you to identify?
I definitely do. I want to step back for a second, though, because my mindset at that time, you have to remember, is that I'd just gotten done playing basketball, right? And I was sweaty. I know I didn't smell good. I wanted a shower. Yeah, I wanted a shower, and I wanted to be comfortable, and that was miserable. Being in the hospital, where I had no shower, I couldn't. They wouldn't let me take one.
Well, you didn't ask, but
I don't think they even had one if I could, but
they wouldn't have let you.
But that's my point. Is I think that's where my mindset was. I was cold from the sweat, just sweating the whole time, and I just wanted to go home. I wanted to get a shower, and I wanted to get comfortable.
Well, you didn't think there was anything wrong.
True.
You had no idea that you were acting weird.
That's right. Exactly. I felt fine at that point.
Yeah. So let me pause here because it's very important to note that they did not call a code stroke. Now, you had symptoms of a stroke. You had some pretty classic signs. We'll get into that later, but they did not call a code stroke. I did not know that at the time. I know that now. That's important. We'll talk about that later, but that is important. And so I also remember asking you, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember asking you if you wanted me to take your shoes off. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
And you said no, because I'm about to walk out of here. I'm about to go home. And I was like, you're not. Because at that point, they had decided they were going to admit you overnight because you failed the tests that the neurologist was asking. But he said that he thought it was most likely like a complex migraine. And so that was kind of what I was hanging my hat on. So I remember, I was considering going home because at this point we were looking at you were not going to be transported until the middle of the night, maybe early morning, depending on when they got to bed. So I was planning on going home, relieving Sarah and Kyle specifically, and then meeting you at the hospital when they transported you in the morning. But you just you still just were not acting right. And what triggered me to what perked my senses up again was I think Josh texted you, our brother-in-law, and you were really struggling to read it. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do, because anything that was sent to me at that time, I had a hard time.
Yeah. Did you ask me to read it? I don't remember if you asked me to read it.
I don't remember if I did or not. I may have.
Oh, no. I remember I asked you to read it out loud. I wanted to know if you could read it. You couldn't. Not really. And so when you couldn't read it, I locked your phone and I handed it back to you. Do you remember this part?
Not really.
And I said, put your password in your phone. And so you started, your password was, is it 6 digits? Mm-hmm. So you would type the first 3 and then stop. Mm-hmm. And then you would say it's not working. I don't know why it's not working. So I would cleared it out and I handed it back to you. And I was like, it's 6 digits. Type in your password. And I'm sure I told you what it was. And again, you would type in the first 3 and stop and say it's not working and you're getting frustrated. So we gave up on that and I stepped out. Do you recall any of that part?
Vaguely, I think I do remember a little bit of that.
Do you remember me stepping out of the room?
I don't know. Maybe. Okay. Maybe. I don't know.
So I stepped out and your nurse was right out there. And so I got her attention and I went over there and I started crying and I said, there's something wrong. He's not right. There's something wrong. And that was the moment where I asked myself, do I go home and relieve Sarah and Kyle because they were at home with the girls and meet you at the hospital in the morning, or do I stay here? And I remember having a very clear thought of your husband's your first priority over your children. So that was clear. I needed to stay there with you. So I decided that I was going to stay. And the nurse came in and she was, checking on you or whatever. And nothing really like transpired of it, or nothing really transpired from it. It was just kind of, I just made her aware that there was something wrong. And then I think I asked them, there was a plastic chair in there. And I don't know if you remember them wheeling in a recliner, but they were really sweet to do that because I asked them if they had one. And I think the reason I asked is because I saw one like at the end of the hall, just like up against a wall. And so she called somebody and they did wheel in a recliner and I slept backwards. Do you remember me sleeping backwards in the recliner?
Yep.
So like I had my head on the footrest and then my feet like as far back as I could, but my feet like reclined up. And it was about 3 a.m, I think, when they woke us up and they were going to transport you downtown. Anything?
I do remember that. I do remember getting transported to a new ambulance.
Yeah.
Right. And going down there. I do remember that part.
Okay. And that was early in the morning. So I was, and I had fallen asleep for just a little while, but I was like really groggy, really tired. I think I talked to the ambulance guy in the front seat, like about his dogs or something, just mundane. I don't know. But for whatever reason, I wasn't in the back with you. And I have no idea why I don't remember. I was half asleep. But we got downtown. They got you upstairs into just a regular neuro room, not ICU. And again, they had not called a code stroke. If you call a code stroke, when they call a code stroke, if I am not mistaken, and I will double check this, it is you have a 4-hour window to do a thrombectomy. So if they had called a code stroke, they could have gone in and gotten the clot. They did not do a CTA. They did a CT in the emergency room to check for a bleed, but a CTA would show a clot because it would show the blood flow, like through your brain, and it would detect it. That's typical for somebody coming in with stroke-like symptoms, and it's definitely typical if they call a code stroke. They didn't do a CTA. They did not do an MRI. I know for a fact they have the capability of doing a CTA at that particular location because they have done one on you before, later. So you had had a CT scan, but you had not had a CTA. You had not had an MRI. So at this point, we had lost the 4 hours. The 4 hours were gone. And they told us that, I don't know, I'm not sure if you remember this part, and I hate to keep asking you if you remember this part, but I know this memory for you is like foggy. So, but they told us that hospital had 2 MRI machines and 1 was down.
I do remember that.
And that's a big hospital, which why they have only 2, I don't know. Maybe that's typical, but 1 was down, didn't call a code stroke. So you weren't a priority. And who knows how many patients were going in and out of that MRI machine before you were. But I left at some point because I didn't have deodorant. I didn't have like contact solution or anything like that. No change of clothes, no toothbrush, like nothing. And neither did you.
Right.
So I decided to go ahead and leave, run home, get stuff. And Sarah and Kyle had spent the night with the girls and they were there, for the long haul, however long they needed to be. And so I ran home, I got my stuff, and then I came back as quickly as I could. And this is key for later, but Mila was really attached at that point. And so when I got home and then I left again, she wasn't super happy about that. So I got back to the hospital and I was talking to you. I was sitting beside you on the bed and I was looking at you and I was just talking. I don't even remember what I was talking about. And I was talking just like this. And you said, "Why are you talking so loud?" Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do actually.
And I looked at you and I was like, "I'm not talking loud. I'm talking normal." I think I laid down, I wanted to lay down in the bed with you and just I remember putting my arm around you and you wouldn't look at me. You wouldn't make eye contact with me at all. You were very, 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 very distant, emotionally, there was nothing. You were just I don't know. It was weird. You weren't there. You were there, but you weren't there. You knew who I was, but it's I don't know. It was so strange. Do you remember any of that?
Vaguely. Yeah. I remember you telling me that. Yeah.
But you don't remember that part specifically?
Not really.
And at that point, you decided to go to the bathroom and you came back out and you said that you couldn't figure out how to flush a toilet. So I went into the bathroom and I'll post a picture here of their toilets, but they're commercial toilets, really easy. But the handle is on the left-hand side, which is important.
Oh.
Then they take you for MRI. So you're gone for MRI at that point for a while. And while you are gone for MRI, the neurology nurse practitioner came in, and he was talking to me. And I was talking to him, and just, I mean, it was a somewhat of a casual conversation, I think, but I just kind of told him, I was like, something just feels weird. And no, he didn't come in first. The nurse came in first. I actually paged the nurse as soon as you left. So I remember the second you left, I sat down on your bed and I paged the nurse, and she came in. And then I started crying, and I said, something's wrong. There's something wrong. He's not right. This is not a migraine. Something is wrong. Then she paged the nurse practitioner, and that's when he came in. And so then we started going through. He was asking me questions. This is coming back to me now. He was asking me questions about, like, I think he asked me, like, could you have herpes or something, like, just running through like differentials. And again, didn't call a stroke code. So I guess that's not what they were thinking was happening. And I think he paged the neurology resident. Remember the guy with the like fanny pack?
Mm-hmm.
You do remember him?
Yeah, I do.
So he paged a neurology resident, and the neurology resident came in. And this part's kind of funny because I told him, as like my one way of explaining to him how Stephen was acting, I said, he can't figure out how to flush the toilet. And the doctor looked at me like, okay, like, what, like, and so then I looked at him. I've worked with enough doctors. I looked at him and I said, you've never seen the toilets in here, have you? And he just kind of giggled, and he's like, no. And I was like, will you come look at the toilet with me? So we went in and looked at the toilet, and then he got it. He's like, oh, okay. Like, I get it. And so that was just funny. But, sometime after that, not long, the nurse practitioner, he had gone, but then he came back. You were in the MRI. Do you remember anything from the MRI or CT? Well, I'm not going to spoil the CT scan yet. Do you remember anything from the MRI?
No, not vaguely.
You don't remember being in like the claustrophobic tunnel or anything?
Not much of it, but I do remember them telling me to be really, really still.
Yeah.
Like I could not move or any of that. So I tried my best to be,
Could you hear the loud noises?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I could definitely hear that. Yep.
So the nurse practitioner comes in, poor guy having to deliver this news. And he walks in, and he kind of like hesitated a little bit. I looked at him before he said a word. I said, did he code? And he said, no, he didn't code, but he has had a stroke. And I just lost it. And that is what I suspected, but was kind of being told, migraine, And I don't remember if he said large stroke or anything like that. I'm not 100% sure. But then you came back from scan. So between the MRI, they found the stroke in the MRI. And then from MRI, they sent you to where you should have been sent in the first place, which was CTA. And that was the one where they told you were going to feel like you peed yourself. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that.
I do remember that. That was weird. It's a little bit, they told me exactly what was going to happen. But, you can't really think about what that looks like until it happens to you. You know, it does. It feels like you essentially are peeing on yourself. But
I've had one. Yeah, it kind of does.
But yeah, it was an interesting feeling for sure. Mm-hmm. Definitely not something normally that I'd be used to.
Yeah. So that would have been the contrast going in, which would have lit up all your all the blood supply in your brain like a Christmas tree, basically. Yep. And that is what showed the absence of a clot, because we lost all that time, but the reason for the stroke, which we will tell you in a minute. And so you came in. No, let me back up really quick, because I want to focus in on a key moment here before you came in. When I was told that, there was a period of time where I was alone from being told that you had had a stroke. I don't remember exactly the exact logistics and timing of it, but I remember that I was told you had a stroke, and then there was a period of time where I was alone. And I remember just like literally bawling. And that is by far the most alone I've ever felt in my life. Because even if I had my family by my side, which I didn't at that time, I didn't have anybody, because there was no reason for anybody to have come yet, because we didn't think it was a stroke, right? Well, I did, but they didn't. So I was alone, and it was just so isolating. And I think I called Carrie. I'm pretty sure. And I told her, and I just sobbed, and I said, I'm so alone. I'm so alone. I'm so lonely. I have no one. I'm alone. And that was when she called Christina and told Christina she needed to come be with me, which happened, she got there later after work that night. But that sticks with me a lot, because it was a deep, deep, dark moment for me. But then they wheeled you back in, and I was balancing, talking to Leah, talking to Cody, talking to Leah's friends who she had sent. Well, her one friend. She had sent one friend over to, well, what I thought was to comfort me, but she had sent one friend over, and I gave her a hug, and I just wept, and I said, sorry, this is the first time I'm meeting you. And she's like, it's okay, cry, whatever. And then I remember telling the doctors like they could share with her whatever, needed to be shared. Just again, giving them permission. I knew I worked, in medicine enough to understand HIPAA. And so I just wanted to make sure everybody had their selves covered and could talk, I think they would have anyways. But so she was talking to them, and she was able to ask them questions. One of which was it a hemorrhagic or an ischemic stroke? Which, do you know what that means?
I don't know the difference.
You wouldn't need to necessarily unless you're a nerd like I am when it comes to medicine. But so an ischemic stroke is a clot, and a hemorrhagic stroke would be a bleed. So you can have a stroke from bleeding in your brain, or you can have a stroke from a blood clot, and that would be ischemic. So yours was ischemic. So she had specifically said, is it ischemic or hemorrhagic? And they said it was ischemic because you didn't have a bleed. They had already ruled that out on the CT scan the night before. Anything you remember specifically about, talk to me about when they told you it was a stroke, because were you upset that I didn't tell you? I didn't know how to tell you. I'm going to be honest. I feel guilty about this, but I kind of took the coward's way out a little bit in telling you. My brain was so like firing on so many cylinders. Like I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to tell you. And you weren't in your right mind. And I think that was the biggest part of it, is because you weren't in your right mind. I had no earthly idea how to communicate with you and tell you. And so I asked them to tell you. Did that bother you?
I'll be honest, I don't remember much of that time, like that part of it. I don't remember who told me or what until you just told me now.
Okay.
So I guess it didn't bother me that much. I don't know. Maybe it did at the time. I'm not sure.
I think you were more bothered by the fact that you had a stroke than you were by who was delivering the news. It was the resident that told you.
I think I asked him if he was joking, because I was kind of in a joke, I think, mood probably that night some. And I was just
it was afternoon by this point, like the very next day.
Yeah, well, I probably, like I normally would with something like that, I probably said something like, you got to be kidding, right? Like, I know this is a joke.
Yeah.
And probably saying something like,
I don't know, because I wasn't in the room.
Yeah,
Again, I was a coward.
I probably said something like that, and he was like, no, man, you do. And
it was the resident that told you.
Yeah.
And then, did you talk to Cody? I think you did.
I think I may have talked to him a little bit, but I remember, I think before that, though, that I guess it was the resident or somebody. I don't know if it was before that, but they showed me a photo of it. Like they showed me that. I do remember that because
it was.
I think he thought
I don't remember which one showed you the photo, but one of them did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was big. It was a big spot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I put you on the phone with Cody.
Maybe. Yeah.
And so Cody, was he able to help? Do you remember anything about that conversation with him?
I really don't. I don't remember anything about it at all, which is kind of weird because I do remember bits and pieces of some of that stuff. But no, I don't remember that conversation at all, which is kind of crazy, but I do not.
So from there, it was kind of just like a blur, like nothing really crazy happened. We just waited for a bed in Neuro ICU to move you to. And so I don't really remember much. I don't think it was very long that we got moved from that room to the next. Do you remember the rooms? Like, do you remember like visually the rooms?
No, not really.
Really? Nothing?
Not really.
That's interesting. I remember them like it was yesterday. Every single one, all three of them. 4. There's 4. Yeah, so they moved us to the Neuro ICU room where we would be for the next like 4 or 5 days. And family came in. Christina came in. I know when I saw her, I again just broke down crying. She brought dinner. I had no appetite. So it may have been the next day that the neurovascular surgeon came in and the stroke attending came in. And they said it was a carotid web, which was basically like an overgrowth of tissue or like a web of some sort. I'm still not sure exactly the mechanics of it. To be honest, I've never even looked it up. Have you? I don't know why. I've never felt the need to look it up. But basically, it was in your right carotid artery, and it was slowing down the blood flow. It was just an abnormality there, kind of causing a traffic jam and setting up the perfect environment for a clot to form. And so it threw a clot. And they did say that it was, the perfect place in your brain if you're going to have one. I will include above in some text or below, I don't know, what part of the brain it was. But apparently it was the best spot. I don't know. you're walking and talking. So, I mean, you know, it definitely could have been worse, and we're blessed. But they walked through the options. And I'm sure you remember this part where the neurovascular surgeon told us that we had two options. One was that he could get a stent put in his artery, his carotid, or he could have an open endarterectomy, and they could go in and literally just cut the carotid. The stent would require lifelong blood thinners, which he wasn't apparently necessarily going to need, depending on what the results of his hematology labs were. And the endarterectomy would lead to, or could lead to, another stroke. So there was a 5% chance of a repeat stroke with the endarterectomy. But there are significant risks with being on blood thinners for your entire life. If you're in a car accident, you're on blood thinners, bad news. So, you know, honestly, we just left it up to him to decide ultimately. I know I told him, the doctor, ultimately we will do what you think is best, because we don't know the best option here.
Yeah.
So I was scared about the 5% chance of a repeat stroke. Were you?
I felt better about that than I was the second option where the stent was put in.
Really?
I didn't want blood thinners for the rest of my life. I mean, because I've got a family member that are on them. So I see that, and I was not a fan of wanting to be on that whatsoever.
Is it more so just because of the inconvenience if you like cut yourself shaving, or?
Well, a lot of that, yeah, is inconvenience too, but there's risks even above that, you know, that was kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. So I would just rather, with a 5% chance, to me, that's low enough where let's just get it done right. And sure, there's a chance, but again, there's a chance I get off of this couch and walk out the door and I get hit by a car.
Okay, well, you're not going outside tonight. So.
Well, I didn't say I was, but I'm just giving you an example of there's always a chance, you know, that something can happen. And we can't really live our life based on that, because anything could happen anywhere. You could have your life planned out, and every step you think you're going to make is, you know what's going to happen. You don't. So to me, the 5% chance was nothing. Sure, am I a little worried about it? Yeah, I remember at the time, I think my brain was like, well, okay, I'm about to go down with and do this. There is a chance where I could have another one, and it would end up making it worse. You know, I could end up being wheelchair bound and all that type of stuff, not be able to communicate. I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, I've got the kids that I had to worry about with that. So there was definitely a little bit of worry there, but for me, that was the option for me.
That was more so my worry about it, because I was on board with doing what the doctor recommended, because I didn't know, but it was scary to face a 5% chance, because we had already been told at that point that you would make 100% recovery. So we were going back to this place where you were going to be put under the knife, so to speak, and there was a 5% chance of having another stroke. And so it was kind of like, in my mind, I was thinking, we've survived, right? And now we're like, we could potentially go backwards, and then, you know, you could be in a much worse position. So that was my main fear, but it wasn't enough, obviously, to want the stent. I understood that wasn't a great option. Both were scary. The open endarterectomy was less scary. And so we opted for that, and surgery was going to be scheduled at some point. And so you were in the hospital for several days. I think it was just really a matter of scheduling. There's only so many neurovascular surgeons in the country. There's not very many, so they stay pretty busy. And he also has clinic, which, spoiler alert, he ended up being my doctor later on, which we will talk about in the next episode. So they're busy. They have clinic, they have surgery. There's not many of them. So yeah, we waited, and the surgery was on, it was on a Saturday. No, hold on. You went home on a Sunday.
It was on a Saturday.
So yeah, it was on a Saturday. And so we were there. And what do you remember specifically about that time between, because I know your memories are hazy, but what do you remember about the time between finding out you had a stroke, deciding that we were going to do the surgery, and then waiting?
I just remember family would come, you know, every once in a while to see them, just waiting on, I mean, really it was all leading up to the surgery. I don't remember too much about that in between it. I just remember being in the room and being bored. I mean, that's for sure. I was definitely bored that, you know, during that time. But I do remember just seeing people as they'd come in, and then, you know, I remember the kids came and I was able to see them, you know, a couple times too. And then, you know, after that, it was just really surgery.
Yeah.
All right. How about yourself? What do you remember about that?
The main thing that stuck out was the kids coming. Mom brought them, and we spent time together, and you spent time with the kids. But the part about it that was the hardest for me was that when it was time for them to leave, I carried Mila as far as like the waiting room. So out of your hospital room, down the hallway, out the double doors towards the waiting room. And then Mom had to like pry her out of my arms. And she cried, Mama, over and over and over again, all the way through the waiting room, down the hall to the elevators. And I heard it the whole time. And I turned around, I walked back through the double doors and just cried and 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 cried. So much so that I couldn't go back in your room like that. So I sat outside of your room, and I remember there was a nurse. I'd never seen her before, but she walked up to me and she just put her arm around me, and I cried on her shoulder, and I said, I don't know you. And she said, and I don't know you. But that meant a lot to me. That was a big thing. That was a big moment. Just such a comfort in that time. But I was able to go back in your room and, collected myself or whatever. And yeah, I mean, from there, it was just a waiting game. But the other thing I remember too about that time is the sheer exhaustion that I was dealing with. And by that, I mean, like, I understand I wasn't the patient. I don't mean to complain or anything like that, but couldn't form a coherent sentence. I literally was struggling to form sentences. I was that tired. I was bone tired. And that'll be important later because I did take one night, and we'll get into that here in a moment. But yeah, I was exhausted. So much so that my prescription and my contacts literally changed. And that sounds ridiculous, but I can't show any photos in the hospital because I was cross-eyed like the whole time. And I was convinced that one of those neurologists, if I kept looking at them cross-eyed, was going to take me down for a scan. Do you remember me being so cross-eyed the whole time? No?
No, sure don't.
It was so uncomfortable. So I actually called my eye doctor, and I was like, look, I can't get to the eye doctor, but this is really uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And so she had a couple of trial pairs, and a friend went down and got them for me. And one of them worked and helped, and it was a relief. But yeah, that was really uncomfortable. And that just speaks to just the level of exhaustion, because you don't sleep in the hospital.
Right.
Patients don't sleep. Co-patients don't sleep. Like, no. So they took you for surgery. I honestly don't remember much about pre-surgery like that day. I really don't. I don't remember. I'm going to be honest. I don't really remember them taking you back for surgery. Do you?
I remember the pastor was there, and we were cutting up with him, right? You were using him as kind of a, I guess to get your mind off of things.
I guess when I say that, I don't remember walking wherever we walked to the pre-op. I
don't remember you walking either. I just remember vaguely being taken back, being on the thing, and then they...
Oh, and they hooked you up to the EEG.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they hooked him up to EEG to monitor brain activity while he was under, and because they had to clamp off his carotid artery, which you only have 4 main blood supplies to the brain, and right carotid is one of them. And so they had to take one down for, I looked at your medical record. I think it was about 15 minutes. Yes, the pastor was there and we talked to him, but, yeah, that was an emotional morning. Your sister came in, did your mom come in?
Mm-hmm.
And your dad briefly?
Yep.
And then hooked you up to the EEG. I liked that EEG tech. Do you remember him?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, he was a cool guy.
Yep.
And I think you invited him to play basketball, didn't you?
I think so, yeah. I remember we talked about basketball for a while.
He was like a big, tall African-American guy, and he was awesome. And you were like, you need to come play ball with us.
Mm-hmm.
And did you tell him he was going to like whoop everybody or something? I don't know. Or he said he would. I don't know. But it was so funny. He was a character. I really liked him a lot.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I guess the part I don't remember is them actually wheeling you back from there.
Yep.
But they did, and walked to the waiting room and just sat with the pastor, me and him in the waiting room, and killed time. And that was just a good distraction. And that way I wasn't focused on watching the clock or anything like that. And I remember the doctor came out, and like, I'm going to be guessing here, but I think it was about 4 hours later, and he started walking towards me, and he started to talk. He said, "Hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so." And I said, "Hold on, let's go to my in-laws who are like down the hall or whatever so that they can hear too." And so we walked, I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but we walked past the, like in those waiting rooms, there's like one big waiting room, and then there's kind of like a hallway with some other chairs like lined up next to the window on your right. And so we walked past those, and there was some people sitting in those chairs. And he goes, "Hello, I'm Dr. So-and-so." And I said, "Oh, no, not them." We got to keep going. And he goes, "Okay, well, I'm still Dr. So-and-so." And then we kept on walking. And then we walked over to where your family was. And he shared that everything went great. And, there were no complications. They were going to keep you, in ICU for a while. And that was obviously a huge relief. And at some point in the next couple of hours, I was able to go be with you in recovery. I'm sure you don't really remember anything about recovery other than the catheter.
Yeah, I remember the catheter. I begged them to take it out because I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And yeah, I did eventually finally get it out, thankfully.
Well, thanks to me. Say thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So the story behind the catheter was that it was needed at first when you were still somewhat sedated, but once you were fully conscious and awake, they really only needed to measure urine output, and they could have done it manually. You could have been given a little thing to pee in, and they could have just measured it, but they didn't want to do that, and they wanted to leave the catheter in. And I walked up to the nurse at the counter and I said, "Hey, look, the catheter is really uncomfortable." And I have had them without epidural blocks before, and they are very uncomfortable. And it had been in at this point for hours. And furthermore, it's an infection risk. So whatever. But I said, "It's very uncomfortable for him. He's asking to have it out." And she looked at me like, just, "No, it's medically necessary." And I was like, okay. And I was nice, and I went back to the room. And somebody, a nurse, maybe a friend that's a nurse, said that I was texting, said that they could measure urine output without the catheter. So another nurse came in, not your main nurse. I went over your main nurse's head and I said, "Hey, his catheter's really uncomfortable. Can you guys go ahead and take it out and just measure manually? Can you just give him a, whatever it's called, to pee in?" And she goes, "Yeah." She was like, "Let me go check and see, but that should be fine." And so then comes in your main nurse and then the nice nurse. Your main nurse was very angry. She was not happy that I went above her head and that she now had to take out your catheter and whatever. And I didn't like her at all. She wasn't very nice. But they took your thing out, and I'm sure you had instant relief. I know you had instant relief after that. And that was like the main thing.
Yep.
And then so from there we were being told that he was going to stay probably like another 72 hours. And we'd been in the hospital for 5 days, or it was either 4 or 5 nights. And I had only left once to go get stuff that first day. And so because we were looking at another 72 hours, and because I would have had to sleep again in a recliner, which is fine, but I knew that I was about to fall out. And so I thought, okay, his sister was in town, and your sister's a nurse, a flight nurse. And so I was like, you know what? This is my one chance while she's here to go home and sleep and know that there's someone competent at his bedside, And so I knew that was like my one opportunity. If I wanted to refresh myself at all before the next 72 hours, I needed to do it that day. And so I did go home that night, and then your sister stayed with you. Do you remember anything about that?
No, a little bit. We watched, I think there was a football game on TV, I think, at the time, and I was watching that and just trying to recover.
You didn't care about the game. Do you remember telling me that?
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah. You just were like, what was that?
Yeah. And I remember just trying to recover. I mean, I do remember that.
No, take me back to the game, because to me that was interesting, because you were an avid football fan and it was a big game.
Mm-hmm.
And you told me you just didn't care. Do you remember why?
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, you just told me, you were like, doesn't seem important. That's what you said.
No, I don't know.
Which I'm sure, like, after going through something like that, how much it's not important comes, is pretty prominent in your mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next day I was on my way back to the hospital, and then I found out you were being discharged. And I was like, well, I would never have gotten home if I had known that we weren't about to do another 3 to 4 day stint in the hospital. So I felt bad about that, but I got back in time. And that was another moment where I came home, I was home with Mila, and then I was gone again. So that was really hard for her. And she really struggled for months after that. Do you remember how much she would just like, do you remember if I even left the house at all? She would freak out.
Vaguely.
Yeah. It was bad for about 6 months or so, maybe longer.
Yeah.
So let's talk briefly about the fact that you were diagnosed with a PFO.
Mm-hmm.
Walk us through. Well, let me walk through the medical part really quick. So they did an echo, and with a bubble study, and that was negative. But then they did a TCD, and it was glaringly positive. So he was a 3 out of 3 and a 5 out of 5, like the biggest possible PFO. So they pass literal air bubbles wherever they put it. I'm not going to pretend to know but it would go in a vein, and then it would go through the PFO if you have one, which is a hole in your heart, and then it would go up to your temple. So they're scanning your temple with just like an ultrasound probe, and they're looking for bubbles. And so, they base the size and whatnot. I'm probably butchering this, but my understanding, they base the size on how many bubbles they see. And for you, it was a curtain, so they couldn't count, and you were 3 out of 3, 5 out of 5. So they told us that you would need a surgery for that. It's kind of like controversial about whether or not to close PFOs. I say that because we have a friend who's an interventional cardiologist, and he walked me through when they decide to close them, when they don't. I believe what he said was that, like, typically if there's no explanation for the stroke other than a PFO, that they will go ahead and close it, even though they're still not confident that that's what caused it. But in your case, like, you had the carotid web, and so he really didn't feel like there would be a need to close it, but the team there wanted to close it. They do also run the PFO clinic, so there's kind of like, I don't know what interest there was there, but I don't want to accuse them of anything. It just was, that's what they recommended. So that's what we said we would do. And so we went home, and the PFO surgery would be scheduled for December or whatever. Talk about going home, talk about seeing the kids, any pain you were in post-surgery, what that looked like. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing was the recovery of where the incision was. That's the biggest part.
Neck.
Yeah, is because I could definitely feel that for sure. That was, I've still got a little bit of a scar, but I think it's healed up pretty well. I do remember seeing the kids was good, but I do remember the couple of days, I think after that happened, I was scared to death to shave. I do remember that. I was just...
Well, you still had a bandage on, so you didn't shave for a while.
Yeah, but I just remember anything getting... And it's still a little tender, like when you touch that area, but if you getting a blade close to it was just... I don't know why, but I did not like that whatsoever.
You couldn't get it wet for a while.
Yep.
So I had to literally help you bathe. Mm-hmm. And then eventually the bandage came off. Yep. And I think that's when you would have been afraid to shave, because you really wanted to shave, because you hadn't been able to for a long time. So you were probably itchy, but you were scared too.
Yep.
I think you had some numbness. Is that right? Is that why you were afraid?
Yeah, it was definitely numb. It was definitely numb. I do remember there was in spots. There were just, you could touch it and I didn't feel anything. Yeah. So now that has come back over time, thankfully. But they definitely said there was a chance that, there may be some spots that didn't. Yeah. So that was part of it.
Anything else in particular that you remember about that part?
I really don't. I truly
do you remember Mila when you got back?
No, that's the sad part.
I'll share some pictures, but like, it was so sweet. She was so cuddly and attached to you. And it was just like, in her little mind, everything was right in her world. Mom and dad were home. Yeah. And you just, like, you could just tell that she was profoundly relieved. And then my mom was in town. Mm-hmm. So mom came in, goodness, I don't even know when, very soon after. She booked a flight within like 30 minutes of finding out you had a stroke. She was like already on there booking stuff. And she was there, and she stayed for a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she left a week before my spinal leak. Yep. Or a week or two, something like that. Yep. So yeah, a month, I guess, is how long she was there. Yep. And so she was doing, just really taking care of everything like she does. She's here now because mental health struggles, and that's just who she is as a person. But she's a rock for us when we need 100%. One. Dad is too, but in different ways, both of them are rock. So yeah, so she dropped everything and I guess made dad some meals for the freezer so that he didn't have to just make sandwiches, and sacrificed 4 weeks, and was here, and not here, but there in our old house. Mm-hmm. And then we'll fast forward a little bit. My spinal leak happened in between, but we'll get into that in the next episode. We went in for your PFO surgery, and is there anything that sticks out to you about that surgery in particular, or that procedure?
I just remember that they got me prepped and ready. And
you're about to say shaved.
I wasn't going to go there, but I mean, I definitely didn't. I didn't like that. I mean, just like, getting prepared for all of that. And
do you remember what you said when they started shaving you?
No, I don't.
You don't?
I don't. Mm-mm.
You literally looked at the lady and you said, if I'd have known they were going to shave me, or no, you looked at me and you said, if I'd have known they were going to shave me, I never would have come.
Oh, okay. That doesn't surprise me.
And I was thinking in my head, I knew they were going to shave you, but I didn't tell you. Because there was no need for you to know that that was coming. Yeah, that was by far the most bothersome thing to you.
Yeah.
You were not happy.
Yeah, I guess I was.
And that lady she was efficient.
Yeah, she definitely was that. But anyway, she ended up, getting prepped and then ended up going in and came out. I don't know if you want me to start how I felt afterwards or what.
Well, I'll talk really quick about the cardiologist when he came out. It would have been an interventional cardiologist. It was an interventional cardiology resident. And so he came out and he took me into like a little conference room or whatever. It was very hard to understand him. He had an extremely thick accent. But what I did catch was that you didn't have a PFO. And he said that they went in, they did the, what was it? No, it wasn't, it was a, I am blanking, TED, I think. I'll double check that, but went down his throat to look at his heart.
Yep.
Transesophageal echo, TEE. So they looked at his heart through his esophagus, like by going down in his esophagus with a camera, didn't see a PFO. And then he explained that they did put some contrast in to look for a PFO and to confirm there wasn't one.
Yep.
We don't have an explanation for that.
I don't.
I don't know how there could be a 3 out of 3, 5 out of 5, and then nothing. I don't know. But I watched that bubble study, so I know they didn't get you mixed up with anybody.
Yeah.
Anyway, he didn't have one, but you did have to deal with the invasion to your groin.
Well, but then too afterwards, it was the recovery for that was tough because I wasn't able to lift anything for a while, and that, I'll be honest, it hurt trying to walk around. So
sure.
It definitely did.
Yeah.
So.
And you were pretty bruised.
Yep, 100%.
But how long did that last?
It was like a week, I think, before I even started feeling better.
Yeah.
Just with everything going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk about how it affects you now, because they told you would make a full recovery. It's been over a year.
Yep.
And I think you still will, but talk about where you're at right now.
I definitely feel better, no doubt about it. There's definitely some times where if a lot of information is thrown my way, I can get a little bit overwhelmed. It takes me a minute to process things. So my processing ability, I think, is a little bit, it's getting there. It's not back to where it used to be. Yeah. But it's definitely delayed versus what it used to be. And I can definitely tell that in stuff that I do. So, and how about your perspective?
So from my perspective, there's definitely some emotional changes, and it did impact a part of your brain where that's, to be expected. I say this lovingly, but I want to say this for people that have had a stroke. There is an impact to maturity level, and it is not your fault. It is just that part of your brain that was damaged, and it is a very common side effect of stroke. It is something that is part of your recovery that you will recover. And that sounds like such an ugly word, and that's just really the best word that there is for it. It's not necessarily that you're like less mature. I think it's just that the side effects of it, that's kind of like the best word that they can give you. And so that's the way they explain it to patients. And that's the way they explain it to caregivers. So they gave me like a pamphlet where it said that. But for other stroke survivors out there or caregivers or wives or husbands or whatever, whoever has walked with somebody who has had a stroke, that's normal. That's common. That happens. And so there's that. But communication can be harder because if we're talking about something that's complicated, it's like you said, it's harder for you to keep up with it. And I'm pretty like deeply analytical. So sometimes that works against us when we're talking about stuff that's, deeper. Mm-hmm. Definitely some effect on your patience level. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100%.
Which that can be hard, hard for me, but it's just something that, we have to work through, and that you're working through, I think, in therapy, I assume, or you will, and that's your story, but you're in therapy to kind of help, with some of this stuff. And the only other thing that I've, the only other major thing I've noticed is eye contact. Mm-hmm. Like eye contact is harder for you, which is really interesting. I don't really know why. It's just something I've noticed. Remember when I said that I like put my arm around you in the hospital and you didn't make eye contact? Yeah. You've gotten better about it, but it's still there for sure. Right. Like if I'm like trying to like snuggle with you, you don't make eye contact with me really. Why is that? Do you know?
I don't know.
Do you notice it?
I sure don't.
You don't know that you're doing it?
No, but I guess I will now.
Well, I don't want to make you feel bad. Well, I've told you that before.
Yeah, I guess you have.
It's not something that like bothers me a ton. It's just something I've noticed. Yeah. It's just something to get used to. Mm-hmm. So you don't notice at all that you're not doing it?
I really don't. Like it's not conscious if it is at all.
It's so interesting how like injury to the brain affects things, Yep. because, I haven't had a stroke, so I don't know what it feels like to lose things that you don't know you lost.
Yep.
Is that kind of how you would explain it?
Yeah. I mean, that's the best way I can say it.
Do you remember what it was like to have some of the things you lost?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You do? Okay.
Yep.
But again, you'll still make recovery. I think the biggest part about it is now that we are here, there's a Neurosciences Institute, which we're working on. I know the referral's been sent. They're behind on getting, patients in. But once we can get you in there, then there's really some some cognitive rehab, which not to say that you're like cognitively challenged, but just like even with struggling with like information overload.
Yep.
And so they can help with that. Neuropsychology is another big one that could be a huge help because they will look at your MRI and your quote unquote deficits, if you want to call it that, which is a harsh word, but, and then they're like the quarterback for therapies that might help. Even like maybe speech therapy, believe it or not, can help, not necessarily with like spoken speech because you don't necessarily struggle with that, but understanding of speech, which is most likely what you'll need to help you with the cognitive like overload. So I think the cognitive overload, you know how Mila struggles with receptive speech, like understanding.
Yeah.
So I think you struggle with that too, but in a different way.
Yeah. For me, it's the getting the information from my brain when it comes at it real fast, and then being able to eloquently say that information. That's the biggest thing.
Like
I think
organize it.
Organize it and then say it correctly.
So speech therapy can really help with
Maybe
that.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. Which kind of frustrates me. That doesn't frustrate me. What frustrates me is I asked them for a speech therapy referral in the hospital and they looked at me like I had two heads. But you become an advocate, like when you've walked through things with your child, not that you're a child, but like I've walked through speech therapy now. And so at that point, I mean, this happened less than 4 years after Mila was born.
Yep.
And so we had been in speech therapy for like 3 of those years.
Right.
So like I had a lot of experience with speech therapy. And so I knew it could help with that stuff. And it's like they didn't.
Right.
Or just there's a little bit of a lack of knowledge there. That there's a bridge that needs to be gapped, so to speak. So anything else that you want to add to that?
No, I don't. I feel better each day, I think, when continuing to recover in the best way I can and just trying to, give my brain time to heal.
Yeah, which you're not super great at giving your brain time.
No, I'm not, but that's something I'm working through each day. So
yeah.
Yep.
Taking time off work has been something you've had to learn you need to do.
Very much so. Yep.
And it helped when you did it for Thanksgiving.
Very much so.
So that is it for this episode. We will dive into my spinal leak, which happened 30 days later.
Yep.
And I was really sick for a long time in episode 4. And then again, just to remind you, episode 5, we will dive into Mila's seizure, which is going to be a really heavy episode. Yep. So stay tuned. Beyond episode 5, we start to get into some other topics, other areas that are interesting, things that we want to talk about, things that we think that you guys would want to hear. So we're not going anywhere. We have plans for future episodes, but those are just the first 5. So so come back and listen to those. All of our socials are going to be down below. Follow us. And if you would subscribe. And if you're listening to this on podcast, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever, if you would leave us a review, that would help tremendously. If you would follow us there, that would also help a lot. And at the end of the day, we really, truly just want to help people. And we feel like this story is something that we've been given to help people.
Yep.
So if you guys would help us out there, we would greatly appreciate it. And we will see you guys next time.
Thank you, guys.